Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, December 31st, 2020, and today we're going to be talking about the state of Georgia, and I'm going to be giving you the update 5 days out from the day when we will decide the Senate majority. So I know it seems as if this election is something that's been going on for a very long time, and arguably it has been, but it's almost over. We're almost into the new year. Tonight we are going to have not an in-person, but a New Year celebration around the world. Some countries have already hit the new year, so it's pretty exciting. We're moving on to 2021. Hopefully, it's a much better year for the entire country and for people around the world. But let's go ahead and focus and hone in on this Georgia runoff election, because this election will likely determine what actually occurs for the next 2 years, and it will let us know what the Biden administration will be capable of or what they will not be capable of moving forward. So, looking at these two Georgia Senate runoff races, they've been very close. 5 days ago and the 5 days before that, they were always exceptionally close. When we talk about the election, where it stood on the 26th, I don't know if it's going to tell me the exact date. Sometimes it goes back and forth, skipping over a few dates, but let's go ahead and look 2 days prior to that. Purdue was ahead by 0.5 and Warnock was ahead by 0.6. So the numbers have changed slightly since 5 days ago. 5 days before then, both Republicans led. So it has gotten to a better point for the Democratic Party, but this could likely be due to skewed polling numbers. What do I mean by that? Well, some of these pollsters aren't exactly the most accurate. They release results that aren't always perfect. Some of these numbers don't really make sense. Purdue plus 3 might be the most lopsided margin that is possible, but that's after it being adjusted. This most recent poll from JMC Analytics shows Ossoff ahead by 8 points. 538 adjusts polls based off inaccuracy, so it adjusted it down to an Ossoff plus 6% lead and a Warnock plus 7% lead, but realistically, that doesn't make sense. That is not going to happen unless something is completely missed about this Georgia runoff race, which is, there's a very 0.1% chance that actually happens, but it doesn't make sense. We're not going to see Democratic victories that are very, very large. Trafalgar Group also shows Ossoff ahead by 5 points based off the adjusted average, and Warnock ahead by 5 points as well. And looking at this pollster, you may recognize the name. It's because they touted themselves as the most accurate pollster in 2016 because they had a few skewed polls that favored President Trump. But this election, they were far from accurate. They were off by 5-6 states, including Georgia. But when you're looking at the poll, you may think, because it skews to the right, isn't this good news for the Democratic Party? Not necessarily. Bad polls are still bad polls. You don't trust them just because they lean in one favor or another. The same way that I threw them out when I saw they put Donald Trump ahead by literally 7 points. That doesn't make sense. Trump was not going to win Georgia by 7 points. He was not going to win by a larger margin than 2016. They were wrong. This skewed 8 points to the left based off the actual results, based off what the poll actually projected. But that was back in July. I'm not too trusting of their polls just because they have always skewed to the right. On top of that, they have a very weird system as to how they do this. I think they are doing this to scare the Republican population in the state of Georgia. Sometimes polls are released so that way opposition ads can use them and, say, well, vote for me because I'm ahead. Or the incumbent party that is losing can use them and say, we're behind in the fight, donate to me instead, and then we can win. And, if you're looking at Trafalgar Group, a lot of the times they do tend to favor President Trump and his agenda. What do I mean by that? Well, generally, they will show candidates who support President Trump more ahead than other potential candidates. When we talk about potential matchups, this is a perfect example. David Perdue is nowhere near as right-wing as Kelly Loeffler in terms of supporting President Trump and his agenda. Nowhere near. But when I'm looking at the numbers, Perdue should always be ahead of Kelly Loeffler. There is no real scenario in which Perdue runs behind Loeffler. Unless we're missing something completely about this race, that's not exactly what the data is telling us, nor was that whatever the data was telling us, whether it was the 2020 election results, the numbers prior to that, or the runoff data we're literally looking at right now. So I think Trafalgar Group is definitely trying to use this as a scare tactic. I don't think that it should be included. It's a C- pollster. The only one I really trust on here is Survey USA. And why do I trust it? Well, it got the 2020 presidential race, Senate special election race accurate. And we're talking down to the exact percentages. The Survey USA Senate special election poll got all top 3 candidates correct. 2 out of the 3 were right on the dot. The other one was just a few percentage points off. It got the regular election correct, off by 1 percentage point. The regular special Senate election off by 1 point. And it got the presidential race within a percentage. So looking at Survey USA, that is the only and also A-rated pollster, highest rated pollster of this entire cycle that I actually trust. But also, I don't think that Warnock's going to win by 5. I don't think Ossoff's going to win by 4. There are definitely some significant inaccuracies across all of these polls, which is why it's great to average them, but I definitely think they're being skewed by these two most recent C-rated pollsters that I really don't think should be included into the averages. Some of these polls I don't think should be included either, but, 538 is going to include what they want to include. But based off the polling numbers, one may conclude that Ossoff and Warnock are ahead, but I also implore you to look at the amount of undecided voters, in this election, because undecideds in the 2020 election broke heavily for President Trump, even more heavily for Republicans. And that's what the Democratic Party should be worried about. Warnock can afford to lose a significant amount of undecided voters. He's ahead by 2 points in a two-way race, an absolute two-way race. There is no writing in this election, no third-party candidates. When you're looking at Warnock ahead, he only needs 0.8% of the undecided voters to win the election. Loeffler needs a lot more. But the problem for Georgia Democrats is that the Republicans have won more than they needed, which is why they won numerous Senate races, why they won numerous races on the presidential level. Looking at the amount of undecided voters, maybe not specifically in Georgia, but in other states, when both candidates were under 50%, Donald Trump sometimes got 80 to 90% of this undecided vote. Let's go ahead and see if we can actually pull up the state of Wisconsin. I think this is a perfect example of that because Joe Biden was well above 50%. He should have won by at least 4 points based off the polling data, but look at where Donald Trump was. Look at him at 43.7%. Let's go ahead and take a look. This is 2016, my bad. Let's go ahead and take a look at the presidential results in the state of Wisconsin because this is a state where the Democratic Party severely underperformed. Not only here, but also Pennsylvania. I think I think Michigan is the only one that's maybe comparable for the Democratic Party. But look at that margin. Joe Biden was not only brought down below 50%, but he's brought down to 49.45%. Donald Trump is at 48.83%. Based off the amount of undecided voters, Donald Trump won 90% of those undecided voters. On top of that, he won a significant amount of people who said they were voting for Joe Biden in the preliminary election polls. So obviously there was something that was missed in the state of Wisconsin. There's something that was missed around the country due to the amount of undecided voters. People didn't realize that many of these undecided voters weren't telling the pollsters who they were voting for because they were afraid to tell them they were voting for Donald Trump. And for me and many other political pundits, a lot of us thought that this was something that wore off. And it was inaccurate. I inaccurately thought that this effect from 2016 had wore off. First things first, the polls have had 4 years to correct themselves. They had a beautiful year in 2018, not a great year whatsoever in this election. But looking at the methodology changes, you would think that with all of the money that's been now invested into polling data, that they would have been able to get the race correctly. And obviously, it's sometimes on the fault of the participants who don't want to tell the pollsters who they are voting for, say they're undecided, but are 100% for Trump. But then you look outside and you look at the amount of vocal Trump supporters and you question whether or not the silent Trump supporter actually exists. But it's clear after this election that it definitely does. And now we have to ask, are there silent Loeffler voters? Are there silent Perdue voters? Probably. You will probably see Perdue and Loeffler do much better than the polls expected. They could be on track to victory for all we know it because Ossoff and Warnock have not hit 50%. Neither of them have hit 50% throughout the entire campaign cycle. David Perdue did once. But other than that, none of the candidates have hit 50% since then. And that's also something that I think the Republican Party is counting on. I think they are counting on the Election Day turnout to actually help them. Speaking of Election Day turnout, we need to actually take a look at the Georgia early voting statistics. Let's take a look at the breakdown by race and ethnicity. What do you notice? Well, non-Hispanic white voters make up 56% of the vote in this election. What about non-Hispanic black voters? It's down from 32%. At this rate, it won't reach 2020 early voting numbers as bad as they were for minority voters. Not necessarily as bad, but it's better here. But the reason why non-Hispanic black voters are moving down and non-Hispanic white voters are staying the same, because I've looked at my two most previous videos, it's 55.6% down to 55.5, keeping at 55.5 in just a 10-day span. Non-Hispanic white voters are not increasing, so where's the numbers from the non-Hispanic black demographic group going? It's going to Hispanic voters, it's going to non-Hispanic Asian American voters, and that's where the numbers are coming from. But also, any vote that's not coming from the non-Hispanic white population, chances are, 2 in 3 chance that they're voting for the Democratic Party. That's just how demographics have voted in the past. On top of that, the congressional districts that are seeing the lowest level of turnout, I don't know if it's on this website, I know it's on georgiavotes.com or .org, but looking at the registered voters and looking at the amount of people who have turned out, The least turned out districts are Republican districts. The highest turnout districts are the overwhelmingly Democratic districts. We're talking 94% for the Democratic Party in terms of the vote in 2020. So looking at the turnout, a lot of it is in Democratic districts. Why? Because Democrats tend to vote early, especially during COVID-19, and Republicans tend to turn out on Election Day. But nearly 3 million people have voted. Nearly 3 million people have voted. 4 million people voted early in Georgia's regular election. There are 2 days left of early voting statistics. In 2 days, I can definitively tell you who will probably be at a very good position. Entering off into the 2021 runoff elections. But that's closer than we are right now. That'll be on January 2nd when we'll get the finalized early vote data. But looking at the comparable results, they're only 1 million votes off. This is the highest level across any election in Georgia. Highest level of turnout, raw vote share or percentage-wise, in a runoff election. Highest level. And when you're looking at it, there are so many things at stake. In 2008, there was a runoff election. I don't know if many people remember, but there was a runoff election in Georgia. Because if Georgia had gone blue in 2008 in that runoff election, the Democratic Party would have had 60 seats in the United States Senate. 60 seats. Isn't that something? They had 59, and they needed Georgia to flip, but it didn't flip. It actually shifted by over 10 points in favor of the GOP. So when I'm looking at these Georgia early voting numbers, the Democratic Party will need a very large, banked-up amount of votes because history tells us runoff elections do not favor the Democratic Party. History tells us any type of non-presidential, non-mainstream election does not help the Democratic Party. Because Republicans do vote at a higher rate in certain states, and Georgia is one of those states. Georgia is a state that has had a very long history of voting for the Republican Party, a very long history, 28 years before Joe Biden. So it's not foreign to them to vote for Republicans. Even in the 2020 election, when they voted for Joe Biden, David Perdue received more of the vote. Republicans in the Senate special election only ran behind Joe Biden by 0.1%. 0.1, and David Perdue did better by 0.2. It may not seem like a lot, but Joe Biden won the election by 12,000 votes out of 5 million cast. Every vote matters. Every single thing about the election matters. Not only did Republicans do better than Joe Biden in Georgia, but Democrats did worse than Joe Biden. John Ossoff won 47.9% of the vote compared to 49.5%. Democrats combined in the Senate special election received 48.4% of the vote compared to 49.5%. They will need to do better. They will need to do much better than they did in the 2020 election. And while the early voting numbers may suggest that that's possible, we still have to wait to see what's going to happen on Election Day. But obviously, we're going to need to make a prediction before then. So a few more things will come into possibilities if that's the real scenario. But the Senate control is determined by just two states. Just two Senate seats in one state that are being held on the same day. And if you're looking at the absentee votes, Joe Biden won them 52.4% to 46.6%. That seems like a very large margin, but that's exactly why, the Election Day turnout almost narrowed up what was a 6-point margin of victory. 6 points in a swing state is usually unheard of. This is a larger margin of victory for Joe Biden than Trump won in Texas, but it was made up for by the Election Day turnout, which consisted of nearly 1 million voters, which broke for Donald Trump 60 to 38. And if that happens in this election, it's very possible, very, very possible, that the Democratic Party is overestimating what they're doing right now or could end up the losers in the Georgia Senate elections, because that is not an unlikely scenario. Both scenarios, I think, are equally likely at this point. Before, I would have told you I think the Republican Party has it in the bag. But based off what I've seen so far, based off the early voting numbers, if the Democrats can maintain this for just 2 more days, it's going to be more difficult for the Republican Party to overcome this. However, with their discussion of election fraud, with their, still very, very supportive base of President Trump, it's possible that many of these supporters no longer trust the vote-by-mail system. If they didn't before, they absolutely don't now. And many of them may have voted by mail because they were afraid of COVID-19. But when you have the President of the United States telling you that the election was rigged through vote by mail, you're not going to be too inclined to vote by mail. You'll probably vote in person, even if that means risking yourself to COVID-19. So there are so many things that are different than the 2020 election and so many things that are the same, which is why it's difficult to gauge how the Georgia runoff elections are actually going to go. But we can get a general idea comparing it to the 2020 early voting statistics. 2 days for Democrats. They have 2 days to match the number of votes. Obviously they're not going to get there, but they're going to get to a pretty close point, highest ever, and we haven't even seen the election day turnout. But looking at the amount of voters based off race and ethnicity, looking at those results, non-Hispanic white voters have remained pretty static. They haven't changed. But non-Hispanic black voters have decreased, but also that's as a result of an increase, an influx of voters from Hispanic voters and non-Hispanic Asian American voters, which actually in turn benefits the Democratic Party. So no matter where you cut it, the early voting numbers are going to benefit the Democratic Party, probably more so than they did in the regular election. But the problem is there's a little bit more things at play than there were in the presidential election. Donald Trump is calling the election rigged, saying that vote by mail is rigged, saying what the Democratic Party, was able to do in the major cities in terms of turning out voters was a rigged election. And if his supporters are going in to the ballot box on election day thinking that, or, putting off their vote by mail ballot to vote in person, we probably aren't getting the best indication of how many people are going to be voting, especially in some of these more Republican districts. Also, there's a very real possibility that voters aren't voting because they don't like Donald Trump anymore. Looking at the approval rating it's dropped nearly 2 points from the regular election. That may not seem like a lot, but 2 points could have made or break, broken a number of states down for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. 2 points, just a 2-point shift would have put North Carolina in the Democratic column. So when you're looking at the approval rating, it may not seem like a lot, but the fact that it was higher before and Donald Trump still lost Georgia, I can't imagine that a lower approval rating is helping him whatsoever. So overall, Georgia, obviously, political epicenter right now. We're looking at Georgia, all eyes on Georgia. A lot of things are going to be happening, a lot of money funded into this race. In just 5 days, we will have a general idea of who is going to win the presidential race. In just 5 days. The Senate race, not presidential race, the Senate majority. And I think that's very interesting that the election is drawn on so long. But also, I'm really hoping that after we get the results, because there is a lot of people voting by mail, a lot of people, nearly 3 million people voting by mail, I really am hoping that this election is not drawn on even longer, but it probably will be now that I'm saying it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my post-2020 election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.